Welcome to American Immigration, 1492 to 1865. Okay, the Great Immigration Debate. Throughout American history, the topic of immigration has inspired fierce debate about who should be allowed to come to the United States. Though Americans are descended from immigrants, they are often uneasy about accepting other immigrant groups. Immigration has often been viewed as something that strengthens the United States, and at other times as something that threatens it. And so you're looking over at the left at an image of the Statue of Liberty under construction in Paris. Okay, it was given to us by the French, our old friends, okay, and they were constructing it in 1886. I'll provide a link that you can click on to explore some of the old images of the Statue of Liberty and some of the story behind it if you want to. Additionally, okay, here is a graph of immigrants by decade. And so this is helpful in showing us the numbers of people that came, okay, throughout the different decades in American history. You can see it peaked in 1901, 1910 before dropping, and then rising again in 1991 to 2000. What this doesn't show us is immigration relative to American population. So I went out and found a chart for that. Again, blue is the total number of immigrants. Blue is the total number of immigrants, and orange is the ones relative to the U.S. population. So again, blue is what we just looked at, and orange kind of shows us that as a percentage of the U.S. population, okay, immigrants have never exceeded, gone above, 15%. They've also always never gone below 5%. And so there's been a fairly steady kind of progression of immigration, okay, coming into the United States throughout our history. Again, sometimes it's been higher, a little bit more intense. Other times it's been lower. And so again, we've always had conflicted feelings about immigration. So one of the first things that we need to mention about immigration is where most of these immigrants are coming from. Okay, previously in class, I talked to you guys about how I am a WASP. And again, that's an acronym. The acronym W, obviously I'm white. Okay, A and S, Anglo-Saxon. That means I'm British in my genetics, my background, my culture. And so in addition, there is P, and P is short for Protestant. And so most of what you see here is that most people coming to the United States, okay, they are coming from northern and western, okay, European Protestant countries. The country was a largely Protestant country, and with it culture. And so what starts to happen, though, and begins to alarm many Americans, is that there is one exception, okay, to this, that northern and western Europe, there is a country called Ireland. Okay, and Ireland, instead of being Protestant, like the other northern and western European countries, was Catholic. And so when we talk about reasons for immigration, okay, we talk about push-pull factors. Push is the reasons that you left, why you were pushed out. Now, it could be that it was religious persecution. And so religious persecution caused a lot of people to come early to the United States. Later on, it might be industrial revolution, might upend your job, your career. Crop failures if you're a farmer, which most people were. And so it could be population growth, could be any number of things. Pull factors are why you came to the United States. You could have gone to Australia, you could have gone to Argentina or Brazil. Why did you choose the United States? Why did you think that you would have the best opportunities there? And so as a quick school analogy, not in the notes, don't have to write anything down, imagine that you want to leave AMS. Some of the push factors might include that you don't like your teachers or the people that you're around, the students. Maybe you feel bullied or that not many people like you. Maybe your parents no longer like the neighborhood that you guys live in. Pull factors. Well, why did you choose to go to whatever school you're going to end up at? Now, let's just say for sake of argument that you go to the Woodlands. What was it about the Woodlands? Did you think that they had great teachers? Did your parents like the neighborhood? Or does your Do your parents work in the woodlands? Do you have family in the woodlands? What pulled you there? And so, as some of these push factors, okay, we have issues like immediately poor harvests and crop failures. You can imagine that if you're a farmer and you endure maybe successive years, year after year, of having drought, okay, of not being able to grow crops, that devastates you economically. And at some point, you've got to leave. Other instances include the Irish, where you had landlords who were English, and those landlords would essentially force Irish tenants off their land. Meanwhile, in industry, we had artisans, and artisans made good by hand. If you make goods by hand, they can never be as inexpensive as those made by a factory. And so many artisans go out of business. Okay, they have to go and reinvent themselves, go get new careers. Many of them end up in the factories that were replacing them. Next, you have political turmoil. The Irish had a long history of being oppressed by the English. The English would come in and take Northern Ireland outright. They would give it over to families who were Scottish and others who were English to a lesser extent. And they took Northern Ireland completely, but then they also controlled much of Ireland and so extracted the wealth of the farms of Ireland. And so there's a lot of politics in Ireland that caused many Irish immigrants to want to leave. In addition, in Germany, there is a failed revolution. And if you lose a revolution and you don't get out of that country in a hurry, you might die. So the Germans at this point feel very motivated to leave Germany and come to the United States. And so finally, as a quick review, and we're going to break this into two parts, you'll see there's a second video where we deal strictly with the Irish, the Germans, and the Chinese. Okay. The first big one of these in American history is religious persecution. Okay, the Pilgrims and the Puritans both left the Anglican Church in England. Okay, again, their ideas were not well tolerated. And so the Pilgrims come first. Okay, and as we know, they write the Mayflower Compact. The Puritans show up 10 years later. They tried to purify the church. The church did not want to be purified. And so when the Puritans finally leave, okay, they show up at Massachusetts Bay Colony, and when they do, okay, they're going to largely take it over. Catholics, meanwhile, would show up to the one colony that was Catholic, which was Maryland. And again, in Catholic theology, Mary is the mother of Jesus, and she is highly revered. Catholics don't worship Mary, but they do highly revere her. And so when they have a colony, it's named after her, Mary Land. Meanwhile, the Quakers have Pennsylvania. And so a quick map to kind of show us some of these distinct religious groups that come to the United States ultimately to experience some of the religious toleration that we have. First group were obviously the Pilgrims, okay, and the Puritans. Now we can see that both of them landed in natural harbors where they set up. Okay, the Pilgrims, okay, immediately before they can leave the ship, they have to write the Mayflower Compact and agree upon it. Okay, PI before PU, just like it's alphabetical. Okay, and then of course later on in the natural harbor of Boston, okay, 10 years later, the Puritans show up. And so beyond the Pilgrims and the Puritans, we then had Maryland. Again, the Lord Baltimore flag. You can see it on their football uniforms. Okay, and then one of the alternative uniforms, okay, that has Fort McHenry on the helmet. Okay, and the words of the Star-Spangled Banner, okay, that were written there in Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, next we had the Quakers. Picture of young William Penn and the older version of him. You guys are all going to age too, enjoy it. And so they then have a big statue of him atop the State House in Philadelphia. He's stuck up there. He's been there for a long time. And so we've talked at length about all those, but there's three groups that we also need to cover with you guys so that you have some background and understanding. A little-known group that showed up on last year's STAR test were the Shakers. The Shakers are a very curious group because most people have really no idea who they are, for a good reason. There's not many of them. Okay, and so there were a group of Quakers in England known as the Shaking Quakers. Okay, their worship services were quite lively. They got up, they sang, they danced. And so they practiced communal living, okay, sharing property. Okay, additionally, they practiced pacifism because there are a lot of Christian groups who are pacifists. They believe that when they read the red letters, that Jesus, Jesus in the Bible, that what they get from that is that to turn the other cheek and to basically not be able to engage in kind of more self-defense. And so as a result, you have many Christian groups who will not join the military. And so for a lot of people who are pacifists, this became a push factor in them leaving countries. Okay, additionally, gender equality was largely unheard of, and the Quakers and the Shakers both believed in it at the time. So the Shakers have one big sticking point, and that is that they don't believe in having children, and they don't believe in marriage. And so as a result, the Shakers can never really grow their numbers from within. They can't have children and grow the population of Shakers. So they have to persuade people to join the group. But if we tell you that, hey, you can't have children and you can't get married, that might be a hard sell. It might be hard to get you to join. And so they formed societies, and there were several groups, but the one that's left today is in Maine, and today there are only 2 Shakers left in the entire world. There were 3. One of them died recently, and so today there is I believe he's about 60-year-old man, and a woman who's in her 70s. And so the Shakers may not be with us much longer. So I'll provide a link that you can click on to kind of explore a little bit. I always like looking at some of these images. This is the one. It's kind of interesting over here. Okay, in addition, another American curiosity, okay, is a group, okay, called the Amish. And so the Amish are an Anabaptist Christian group. The Anabaptists believe in baptism. They believe that it should occur when you're an adult, not when you're a kid. And that belief got them persecuted by Protestants and Catholics. And you're probably like, well, why would they care? Okay, it's kind of complex. What happens is it used to be that virtually everybody baptized children when they were children. You didn't baptize people as adults in Europe. And so they'd bring you over, they'd sprinkle you, that would be kind of the routine. Well, the Anabaptists, when they read Scripture, they determine that, hey, this happens when people make a decision, okay, when they're adults, and that's when we'll do it. But the problem, okay, is that you have this thing where you're essentially, the first time that you're baptized, that's when they record you into the state. And so when you don't get baptized as a child, if an Anabaptist withholds their child from being baptized, when they're young, they're not being brought in properly to the state. This is not only going against the religious teachings, it's also kind of going against the state. And so there wasn't much tolerance for the Anabaptists in what they were doing. The Amish are in Switzerland, and they're going to leave. Okay, they've got to get out of there. Again, if the Protestants and Catholics caught the Anabaptists, they would often drown them. That was often how they were persecuted and killed. Large numbers settle in Pennsylvania. Okay, they're very deliberate about the acceptance of technology. When I say deliberate, I mean they choose intentionally whether that technology will get them closer to God or bring them further from God. And so the Amish typically don't have electricity, or if they use things that have electricity, it's very intentional about it. And so you'll often see that there are Amish groups that they do use cell phones, although they might choose to use a flip phone. I ran into an Amish girl basically in Philadelphia when I was walking through a store, and she was using a flip phone. And so currently, they're averaging about 7 children per family. Okay, that number is much bigger than the typical American family. Okay, and it's much bigger than many, many places in the world. And so their numbers are growing. There's about 330,000 of them today. They are not going away like the Shakers. And so Weird Al Yankovic's song Amish Paradise, kind of giving the Amish some grief about their kind of quaint ways of living. Okay, or the Amish memes that exist out there. Okay, but you're going to run into Amish because they're now in about 30 states. Okay, and so they have little communities here and there in different places. Okay, and so our final religious group that we're going to cover before we close this video are the Mormons. And the Mormons are unlike any other of the groups that we've just shown. Whereas the other groups came from Europe, settled in the colonies, okay, settled in America. The Mormons started in America in upstate New York. That's where they get their start, is here in America. And so here's a quick image that I showed students for years. Students get a little creeped out by these Mormon children, their eyes in the photo. But it's a pretty cool looking image with the Conestoga wagon behind them. And so here you can see up here that what you've got is you've got this image, okay, of the pathway of the Mormons. Now the Mormons ran into a lot of problems because their theology was a little bit different, okay, than many other Christian groups. The Mormons had practices at the time like polygamy, okay, belief in marrying multiple wives. And so today the Mormons no longer practice polygamy. Some of their other theological distinctives, okay, were also very different. And so the Mormons tended to kind of stick together and vote together, and that caused them even further persecution. And so they moved from New York to Ohio to Missouri to Illinois, where Joseph Smith, who had many wives himself, okay, is murdered. Okay, and at some point, having experienced all that persecution, they decide to emigrate with an E and leave the United States for Mexico. And they will choose one of the more difficult places to live, a high desert with a salt lake, okay, leaving the country. Okay, all these reasons, where it's cold, all these reasons why no one else would want to go there.